Okay, this document we're going to look at this evening, um, it's the instruction of the Congregation for Catholic Education in 2022. And it was still, at that time, the castery was still called Congregation for Catholic Education. And the name of the document is Identity of the Catholic School for a Culture of Dialogue. When this came out, I had palpitations because, well, we hadn't gotten anything really pretty good out of Rome in a long time. And then the title itself was very nerve-wracking, a culture of dialogue. And usually we know what that means is how are we going to sell out our product. And so at any rate, it turns out, for my estimation, probably the best education document out of the Vatican since the Vatican II document on Catholic education. Really absolutely superb. And now the backstory on this, and the document is remarkable also for its very honest assessments and declarations. Namely, they essentially say, we're issuing this document because we're tired of getting cases being sent to Rome for things that should be handled locally. And so this is giving bishops and superintendents and pastors and so forth the material that they need so that these issues can be handled. Well, the principle of subsidiarity. Now, a document like this is also very difficult to write, given a universal church where social and political and cultural situations can be so incredibly different from place to place. But I think they've done a really, really good job with this. I hope that it is more effective at the local level than John Paul's Excordia Ecclesiae, which was essentially dead on arrival. Not the Pope's fault, it's the fault of the American bishops, all of whom have been afraid to implement what that document says should be happening. So paragraph, and we'll just go along this way. So paragraph 1. One of the most recurrent and topical issues in the general debate was represented by the need for a clearer awareness and consistency of the Catholic identity of the Church's educational institutions all over the world. At the same time, the congregation has been confronted with cases of conflicts and appeals resulting from different interpretations of the traditional concept of Catholic identity. Monsignor Shadle, has that Jesuit situation ever been handled in Indianapolis?
No, it'll probably be another 50 years.
Yeah.
No, it hasn't.
Hey, you want to just give a quick précis of the situation?
We have more than two. There's two what we call private high schools. In other words, they're not run by the Archdiocese. One is the Holy Cross Fathers and Brothers. The other is the Jesuits. And what happened was, in both cases, the guy that teaches German at Cathedral, Holy Cross, married the math teacher, the guy that teaches everybody.
You got the point, right? Okay.
So there is a stipulation in our contracts for all teachers that they must hold the teachings of the Catholic Church, which, interestingly enough, was really emphasized and put in effect by Cardinal Tobe when he was our Archbishop. Well, our current Archbishop, Charles Thompson, really tried to dialogue with both schools for 3 years, and nothing came of it. So finally, in both cases, he said, you may no longer call yourself a Catholic school. You're not Catholic. He revoked having a tabernacle in school, and the Holy Cross School, Cathedral, capitulated and said, okay, and they let the German teacher go. The Jesuits refused to capitulate, and mainly prompted by, I just happen to know, mainly by the provincial. The provincial was the fly in the ointment in this case. And of course, like many of these schools, it's run by a board of directors and so on. And so the case, the Jesuit fathers and brothers referred it to Rome. And while it's being reviewed in Rome, they can still call themselves a Catholic school. That's probably been 5 years ago. So 3 years of negotiations, which went nowhere, 5 years, and you know how long it takes the Holy See to resolve them. Oddly enough, I understand, I know that the person the Holy See appointed to kind of negotiate this case, if you will, is Cardinal Tony.
Yeah.
So, but.
Who created the morals clause to
Yeah.
begin with.
But it has not been resolved. And I know enough to know that the Jesuit fathers who are on the staff of the school are not comfortable with this situation at all.
Hmm.
But at that time, they're provincial, and then the lay board was ready to stand up to the Archbishop.
So that's the kind of situation that this document was written to address. Okay, so skip over to paragraph 4. The congregation hopes that this contribution be welcomed as an opportunity to reflect and deepen our understanding of this important topic, which concerns the very essence and raison d'etre of the Church's historical presence in the field of education and schooling, in obedience to her mission to proclaim the gospel by teaching all nations. Now, this is the shot across the bow here. Simply put, if we can't get Catholic identity straight, we've lost our way. And essentially then failing to heed the Lord's Great Commission. I have my doctorate in education from Fordham, that displaced pagan temple. And I remember, of course, when I started there as a third theologian for the doctoral program, and there was absolutely nothing Catholic about the place whatsoever, not even a Catholic symbol, all right? And it's the Leon Lowenstein campus of Fordham University. I always kept asking, I wonder when Yeshiva University is going to have the Ignatius Loyola campus, right? Of course, there's no money in that. At any rate, the situation there was absolutely dire. And I remember, and that's the Midtown campus. The Bronx campus is the original campus. And I remember meeting a professor of science on the main campus, and it turned out he was Jewish. And I said, what do you think of Fordham? And he said, I have no use for the institution whatsoever. He said, it lost its Catholic identity. I said, a Jew is concerned about the Catholic identity. He said, oh, absolutely. Because if you don't have that, you can't do anything. And I said, what makes you think that it lost its Catholic identity? He said, I can tell you the date and the time that it happened. He said, because I'm a science professor, I had an experiment going that I had to go on campus on the weekends. And I walked onto the campus on a Sunday morning, and Jesuits were on pickup trucks going around the campus, ripping crucifixes off the walls of the buildings. He said, that's the day Fordham died. And again, a complete, I mean, perhaps even not even a believer of any kind, but he saw the situation. Right? So, so how do we get an overview of the whole document? Paragraph 7, an intentionally concise and practical tool that can help clarify certain current issues and above all prevent conflicts, all right, and divisions in the critical area of education. Only a strong united action by the Church in the field of education in an increasingly fragmented and conflict-ridden world can contribute to the evangelizing mission and so forth. And so again, you see, they're admitting that the world obviously is in a fragmented and conflictual situation, but that ought not to be the case in the Church. And if we're in the same boat as everybody else, then there's nothing that we can really do. Chapter 1, paragraph 9. The icon of the Mother Church is not only an expression of tenderness and charity, but also holds the power to be a guide and a teacher. You may remember John the 23rd's encyclical Mater et Magistra, And, a lot of people are happy to talk about the church as mater, and that's emphasizing what the document calls tenderness and charity. But the magistra part, is guide and teacher. And these things, they're not mutually exclusive, In fact, if you have a good mother, one of the things she does is function as a guide and a teacher. And you can't have one without the other. Paragraph 10, as a consequence, the council affirmed that to fulfill the mandate she's received from her divine founder, the Holy Mother, the Church, must be concerned with the whole of man's life, even the secular part of it, insofar as that has a bearing on his heavenly calling. And then skipping down, this clarifies that the educational action pursued by the Church through schools cannot be reduced to mere philanthropic work aimed at responding to a social need, but represents an essential part of her identity and mission. Cardinal James Hickey of Washington created a kind of mantra. He said, "We operate schools not because the students are Catholic, but because we are." Now, there's truth to that. But in point of fact, if there is no evangelistic thrust into the work, then there's no reason for us to be there, okay? And I think that's one of the reasons, for example, that probably now 20 years ago, Cardinal Wuerl handed over about 10 of the schools in the city to become charter schools, because there was nothing Catholic going on in the place. I have no problem with a school having a large percentage of non-Catholics. I mean, that's happened in all the missionaries of the church, okay, areas of the church. But if they're there and nothing ever happens in terms of bringing people into the church, then we've got a problem. It means we haven't been doing our job. And we're not just a social service agency. Paragraph 11. Education as the formation of the human person is a universal right. And this is basic Catholic social teaching, which finds its way, interestingly enough, into the UN Charter of Human Rights. And who was the great brains behind that document? Maritain. Maritain, okay. 12. Since education is a right for everyone, the council called for the responsibility of all. We're going to come back to that point in a bit. The state is responsible for supporting families in their right to choose a school and an educational project. We're going to spend some time tomorrow talking about school choice initiatives, okay? And one of the biggest problems is in the American system, we say parents have the right to choose, if they can afford it, right? And so a civil right penalized is a civil right denied. It would be what the situation was, for example, in the Deep South after the Civil War. Yes, blacks can vote. Anybody can vote. But you have to pay a poll tax to vote. So if you didn't have the money to pay the poll tax, you couldn't vote. Right? It was a simple way to handle their problem. Right? Paragraph 13. Evangelization and integral human development are intertwined in the church's educational work. Can't have one without the other. Huh? 14. Another fundamental element is the initial and permanent formation of teachers. When I was a boy, we had lay teachers in our schools. But, well, for example, the grade school I went to initially was huge. We had, 5 sections of every grade. We probably had 3 sisters in every grade and a couple of lay teachers in every grade. Now, the sisters had their own internal formation program in their communities. But the lay teachers who came on board were being formed by the sisters who were teaching those grades. So there was a kind of a co-natural formation system. And with the demise of women religious by and large, that imploded completely. So our formation of teachers today, I've got no problem with a school being entirely lay faculty. Right? I would say Mother Seton was a lay woman when she started this adventure. Bishop Carroll kind of pushed her to become a nun. But in point of fact, there's a need to be very intentional about the formation of teachers today. Number one. Number two, I've been in this operation an awfully long time. The workshops I give today to teachers I'm saying the same stuff that I did 40 years ago. And when I said it 40 years ago, I was getting sneers, right? That doesn't happen anymore. So if lay teachers are not doing the right thing today, or not doing everything they could or should be doing, it's not animosity and it's not ideological. It's just literally ignorance. Don't know about it. Okay. Some years ago, I was doing I was in Miami, a teacher workshop, and when I do a whole day thing, one of them I call breathing Catholic air. And so I was explaining what I meant by that. And I said, it's more than a crucifix on the wall or a statue of Our Lady, and in a religion class. And among other things, I said, for example, if you're teaching math and an ambulance goes by, you stop, say, boys and girls, let's stop and pray for the sick person. Let's pray for the medical personnel, and so on. Or you're teaching history and the church bell tolls for a funeral. Let's stop and pray for the deceased and the consolation of the family. And this young teacher sitting in the front row started weeping inconsolably. And I thought, what did I say? I do have that reaction on people at times. And so I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, she said, "Father, that's so beautiful." And she wasn't doing it, not because she was ideologically opposed to it. No one ever talked about it. All right. She was going to be doing from that day forward. That was for sure. Right. And I think that's the kind of thing when I'm talking about intentional formation. Right. Paragraph 15, the success of the educational path depends primarily on the principle of mutual cooperation, first and foremost between parents and teachers. A lot of teachers that are now in our system at one point had been teaching in the government school system, and almost universally, they will tell you the first thing that surprises them about the transition to a Catholic school is the involvement of parents. One teacher said, her first parent-teacher conference in the local, I always call them government schools, by the way, because that's what they are. And she said she had, out of a class of 30 kids, 5 parents showed up. She said her first time at a parents' meeting in the local Catholic school, 90% of the parents showed up to the meeting. Now, of course, there's also the investment that a Catholic school parent makes, unless you're in Florida where you get everything for nothing. About which more another section. 16. As far as Catholic schools are concerned, the Conciliar Declaration, by the way, Gravissimum Educationis, is unique in church history for what reason? You can put this into one of your Catholic trivia games. It's the first conciliar document in the history of the church on Catholic education. Kind of surprising, it took 20 centuries to do it. But so, in line with the ecclesiology of Lumen Gentium, it considers the school not so much as an institution, but as a community. And then farther down, creating for the school community a special atmosphere animated by the gospel spirit of freedom and charity. In this way, the Catholic school prepares pupils to exercise their freedom responsibly, forming an attitude of openness and solidarity. The exercise of freedom. John Paul was famous for talking about this. We're free. We're free to do something, all right? Not free from something, right? So you're free to do the right thing. And that's the kind of education we should be giving kids, Paragraph 17. In particular, the permanent profile of Catholic identity in a changing world, the responsibility of the witness of lay and consecrated teachers and school leaders, the dialogical approach to a multicultural, multi-religious world. Moreover, for Catholic schools, it is important that students be given also, as they advance in years, a positive and prudent sex education. Now, back in the late 70s, early 80s, all kinds of problems emerged in Catholic schools because places were doing some really, really bad, quote, sex education, right? In fact, in some dioceses, stuff was being taught in the Catholic schools that couldn't even be taught in the government schools, right? And that soured a whole generation of parents and created a whole network of distrust. You'll hear people say today, I don't use the Catholic school because when my brother went there, it was, I say, well, how long ago? 40 years ago. Well, that's a long time ago. And so maybe you ought to take a look at the place again. But it did set up a whole hermeneutic of suspicion of what went on and did not go on in our schools. So it's not that there's an opposition on the part of the church to education and sexuality, right? We had that when I was a kid. In seventh grade, the senior curate came and said, "Boys, let's go down the hall." Brought us down to the cafeteria, and gave us, sex education. And when I was in eighth grade, my mother said to my father, you better give the kids some information. And I never knew my name at home. And so he took me out one Saturday morning. He said, "Well, we're going to go for a ride." I said, "Mommy, I'm an only child, so in an only child home, you don't do things with one parent. Everybody is part of the program." And I said, "Well, Mommy, no, just you and me." And I thought, I think I know where this is going. And and so he starts hemming and hawing, and I thought I want him to hang for a while, And while you're getting older, it happens every year, Daddy. Get older, and I said, finally, I thought I took mercy, and I said, "Is this going to be the talk about the birds and the bees?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, Father Hammond told us all that last year." "Oh, good. Let's go have ice cream." That was the end of the whole thing. But the document talks about children coming from a changing world. And that's critically important to understand, sometimes you'll hear, rad trads say, "Well, the Catholic schools today aren't what they were in 1950. Well, I hope not. Okay. I mean, if they were, we would not be doing anybody a service. The world has so radically changed since then, right, that if we were doing what we did in 1950, we would not be performing any valid service for the kids in front of us. Now, the document is saying the world has changed, not for the better, and therefore the church has to kind of step in the breach there and provide what should have been provided at home and all the rest. And one of the points I always make when I do any of my school evaluations and visitations, first thing I say is, and Father Belmonte knows this we did the high school's assessments for his diocese last year. But one of the first recommendations I make is you need to have mandatory parenting sessions, 3 to 4 sessions a year. Why? Because this generation of parents do not know how to parent because they were not properly parented themselves. All right. And some of the things that you find out about even practicing Catholic parents, the ignorance and just other. I was working with a young priest some time ago that has a problem with pornography, and I said, "How did this happen?" And he said, "Well, when I was 4 or 5 years old, 4 or 5, my father, practicing Catholic, right, would say, 'Hey, Tommy, come here, look at this. Isn't this a scream? Isn't this a riot?' The father introduced the kid to pornography at 4 or 5, right? And this is what we're dealing with. And you get this idea that, kids coming to us today are coming from Ozzie and Harriet homes, It ain't the case, okay? It just is not what the reality, if it ever was. But certainly it is not now. 18, to offer an educational service appropriate to the present times, the witness of Catholic education shows on their part a great responsiveness to the diversity of cultural situations while remaining faithful to their own identity. Right? See, that's the balance. You have to be aware of what the current situation is. And sometimes you'll hear people say, "Well, I don't care what the Gallup polls say about 80% of Catholic women practice birth control." All right. Well, I think it's important to know that, not to change the teaching on birth control, but it's important for us to know where that teaching lies with the average person, so we know how to approach it at a pastoral level. The 19, school as such is designed not only to develop with special care the intellectual faculties, but also to form the ability to judge rightly, to hand on the cultural legacy of previous generations, to foster a sense of values, to prepare for professional life. If you want a job description or a mission statement, you got it right there. That's what we're about, huh? Farther down, relationships as a precondition for becoming a person capable of building a society based on justice and solidarity. Relationships. One of the high schools I inherited, as the veterans know, you get the reputation of the priesthood for being Father Fix-It. So you always get sent to a dump to fix, which I don't mind doing, but what upsets me is your gas fumes are fresh in the driveway leaving, and your successor there is undoing what you fixed. At any rate, we have the situation of the school was terrible. No religious environment, bad academic standards, no discipline, but we had a winning football team, so it was a great high school. All right, and I was there less than a month, and a woman called and she said, "I'm involved in a master's program at some local university, and I have to visit 3 schools, and I'd like to visit your school." And I thought, oh, the last thing I want is strangers coming in here and seeing how bad this is. And so I said, well, I'm new on the block, and they give me some time, blah, blah, blah. And where she was like the woman in the gospel, she wouldn't stop. She kept calling. And so I said, well, let her come, because probably you think it's worse than it is even. So I let her come in, but I hooked her up with some decent teachers and so on. And in the change of periods that morning, she meets me in the hall and she said, she wasn't Catholic. And she said, do you know what kind of school you have here? And I thought, she's discovered it already. It's only 3rd period. And I said, oh, what's that? And she said, your kids like the teachers and your kids like each other. I said, oh, yeah. She said, well, that's not the school I'm in. And it was something that we would just take for granted in a Catholic environment, but it's what they're talking about here, huh? It's a community, it's a family, and how people relate to each other. So in spite of the many weaknesses that might be in the system, that's something that kind of remained in the DNA of the institution. And we can say that a Catholic school is a school of human relations, huh? And it's preparation for family life, it's preparation for consecrated life, it's preparation for living in society. 20. A Catholic school is endowed with a specific identity. It's reference to a Christian concept of life centered on Jesus Christ. It can be said that in the Catholic school, in addition to the tools common to other schools, reason enters into dialogue with faith. John Paul's Fides et Ratio, huh? Some of you may remember John Paul's first visit to the States in '79, and he had a meeting with Catholic high school kids in Madison Square Garden. And he asked, why does the church in this country expend so much money and energy for a Catholic education? He said, it's for one reason alone, to communicate Christ to you. And if we're not doing that, we're not doing the reason for our existence. What's our purpose in existence, right? The old Baltimore Catechism: God made me to know Him, love Him, serve Him in this world, so to be happy with Him forever in heaven. That's the purpose of the whole project, which is to say that the ultimate purpose of a Catholic school is to make saints. In the one institution, another bad place, I had the whole 750 kids in the gym the first day. Had to be a lion tamer, and I said, this school exists for one purpose: to make everybody a saint. And this blood-curdling scream came out from the bleachers: I ain't no saint, and I don't want to be. I said, who said that? Center court, quick, whoever. He comes strutting down, and I said, first of all, you better improve your grammar. I said, secondly, that you are not a saint, that's clear. That you say you don't want to be, we have a problem. And if that's the truth, then get out of here right now, go to my office, and wait till the end of this assembly, and I'll transfer you to the public dump down the block. and anyone else who thinks like him form the procession right behind him. I find out, of course, it's the captain of the football team. And who ends up becoming my closest ally and himself coming an incredibly long way and a tremendous influence for changing the culture of the school. But exists to be saints. Paragraph 21. Catholic schools are part of the church's mission. All right. This is, should be a self-evident statement, except that you talk to the average priest and bishop, frankly, all right? They don't believe that, right? The average priest or bishop would be delighted if every Catholic school closed tomorrow. It's a hassle. When I hear a pastor say the school is a drain, I'm lucky I have low blood pressure because it goes through the roof when I hear the school is a drain. First of all, there's never been a school in history that produced money, unless it's Harvard getting billions of dollars from the government, okay? But the truth of the matter is, the school is as essential part of the identity of a parish. You wouldn't say, hope you wouldn't after say, well, the candle bill and the wine bill and the flower bill, they're a drain on the parish. So, well, that kind of goes with the picture, that's part of the budget. Well, that ought to be also the attitude toward Catholic education. It's an essential part of the identity of a parish. And which also means, among other things, I mentioned this at dinner this evening, or I think it must have been at lunch with the priest of the faculty here. I'm opposed to tuition for Catholic schools K to 12. And it ought to be free. And not at the state expense. That's another issue that we'll talk about tomorrow. But why? It's the responsibility, according to the Code of Canon Law, canonist here will tell you, the responsibility of Catholic education is the responsibility of every Catholic. Not simply of parents who have their kids in the Catholic school, not simply of a parish that has a school on the property, right? It's the responsibility of every Catholic. Just as, whether we like it or not, or whether we use the government schools or not, we pay taxes on it. It's part of what it means to belong to this society. And the investment that's made, I'm involved with a pastor in the Colorado Springs diocese who is building a school, our first time in history of the parish to have a school. And I said in my homily to the people last Lent, I said, the reason for the school is so that there will be people to populate the pews of the church, right? And the bishops of the 19th century saw that connection very, very clearly, huh? And that got lost in the shuffle. And just as an aside, one of the most egregious oversights of the American bishops in the past 50 years has been essentially the abandonment of Hispanics for Catholic education. It is the first immigrant group in American history not to be served by the Catholic school system. All right. I'm the grandson of 4 immigrants. I'm a priest with 2 doctorates. That's what the Catholic schools did for 2 and 3 generations in a row. Right. And then with the Hispanic situation, of course, the Hispanic arrival coincided with the lack of interest in Catholic education on the part of most bishops. And so it wasn't even part of the conversation. And also, as Catholics left cities and moved to suburbia, very few bishops had the insight and the foresight to say, we need to build a school. And that was the first thing in most parishes. The Miami Archdiocese was fortunate because Archbishop McCarthy, was he Cleveland? Cincinnati. When they had massive, movement down there, every new parish in the Archdiocese, the school was built first. And what happened in a lot of other places is they built a church, the school never got built, and if they were going to build it, after you've educated, in quotes, a generation outside the Catholic school system, it's awfully hard then to say it's really important to have it now. The parish where I went to high school has been split 7 times since I entered the seminary. Right? The parish grade school has 600-700 kids in it with a waiting list of probably 500. The high school is still a parish high school, about 600, but all the daughter parishes have not built a school. And if you put all of those daughter parishes together, you're dealing with something like 3,500 to 4,000 kids in CCD, untouched by Catholic education. And then we say, I wonder why we don't have people in the pews. I wonder why we don't have vocations and all the rest of it, right? So, Brian, what time are we supposed to end this scintillating session? I'm glad you didn't laugh at that line.
Like 5 minutes.
Okay. So the next section on the identity of educators. 24. The work of the lay Catholic educator in schools, particularly in Catholic schools, has an undeniably professional aspect, but it cannot be reduced to professionalism alone. Professionalism is marked by and raised to a supernatural Christian vocation. All right. So we're not denying the need for professional training of lay teachers, but that's not in opposition to their Catholic identity. And notice that we're talking about the identity of a Catholic school teacher. It's a vocation, right? It's not a job. And it's good to have lay teachers in Catholic schools. 99% of our kids are going to be lay people their whole lives long, right? It's also good to have clergy and religious in those schools to round out the entire ecclesial picture. Paragraph 26, toward the middle, initial permanent project of formation, able to grasp the educational challenges of the present time, provide the most effective tools for dealing with them. This implies educators must be willing to learn and develop knowledge and be open to the renewal and updating of methodologies, but also open to spiritual and religious formation and sharing. And here's where a pastor or perhaps the lone priest in a high school comes into very important play. I believe that at least once a month, every faculty ought to be led in a religious theological formation session by a cleric, all right? And now, my Newman House Press published a book maybe 15 years ago. What's the name of it? Recovery in Catholic Philosophy of Education, all right? When we published it, we were told it was the first Catholic educational philosophy book in English in 40 years, right? But it's written by a professor from Rockhurst University, Curtis Hancock. And I encourage school administrators to take a chapter of that book that the whole faculty read chapter 1 together this month, and at the end of the month, spend half an hour discussing that chapter, and there are discussion questions that are there. Or take an ecclesiastical document of some kind and study that. And that's part of that ongoing theological and spiritual formation. And it's worth a heck of a lot more than spending a half hour on attendance procedures, okay? Which can be handled in an email. 29. Faced then with the continuous technological transformations and pervasiveness of digital culture. We've been hearing, the current Pope with his concern about AI, all right? I mean, these things are real. I mean, these are serious issues. And Catholics are not Luddites, I tend in that direction. I don't like computers or anything. But 25 years ago, I was warning Catholic school teachers and administrators, don't allow kids easy access. I said, no kid below 8th grade should have access to a computer for any reason, period. And it dulls them. It's not, we found out subsequently, it's not good for vision. It's not good for all kinds of things, but it harms creativity and so forth. But as a matter of fact, now all the studies are showing exactly that. But to teach them how to use technology, I use it. If I'm writing a talk or something, and I say, now did that happen in 1846 or 1849? Well, I'll go to Google and look it up, and then when I'm finished, I go back. That's not what the average kid does. All right, he goes and there's an interesting link to this, which is another link to that, and so what should have been a time saver, now 2 hours later, he still hasn't gotten to the original question. Right? So teaching how to use technology. Paragraph 30. Catholic schools are ecclesial entities. Blazon it, all right? I mean, that ecclesial entities. And at the end of that paragraph, the duty to respect one's own identity and that of others, because true dialogue cannot be built on ambiguity or a willingness to sacrifice some good for the sake of pleasing others. And isn't that exactly what happened to the vast majority of Catholic universities in the country, right? That it was, well, go along to get along. And it doesn't help anybody. And that's why you see every month you find another one of these alleged Catholic universities going out of business, right? It was bound to happen. Why should anyone spend money on something that's just a bad replica of what they can get for nothing somewhere else? All right.